Boa tarde a todos. Em primeiro lugar, queria dizer que estamos sendo transmitidos ao vivo na página do MobLab no Facebook. Então, é por isso que eu estava só aguardando coordenar isso. Eu sou a Hanna, coordenadora de Desenho Urbano e Mobilidade da iniciativa Bloomberg para a Segurança Global no Trânsito. A gente tem uma parceria de 5 anos com a Prefeitura de São Paulo, um acordo de cooperação que começou em 2015 e vai até 2019, e está dentro da década de ação da ONU para a Segurança Global no Trânsito, que tem como meta reduzir em 50% os acidentes no mundo todo. Hoje, a nossa oficina é sobre o Guia Global de Desenho de Ruas. É um prazer ver várias caras novas aqui e outras conhecidas muito próximas que têm participado bastante com a gente. A iniciativa Bloomberg, ela funciona da seguinte forma: tem organizações parceiras especializadas no tema, e a NACTO de DCI, hoje representadas aqui pela sua diretora, Sky Duncan, e a Ankita Shashkra, gerente de projetos, é uma das organizações parceiras. Também vai participar hoje da oficina a WRI Brasil, outra organização parceira. Eu sou parte da equipe local, então, justamente para fazer a conexão entre a equipe da prefeitura e as organizações parceiras, e eu fico, minha equipe, eu e mais algumas pessoas que estão lá no fundo, ficam hospedadas aqui no MobLab, nesse laboratório da Secretaria de Transporte e Inovação e Tecnologia. Então, sem mais delongas, vou passar a palavra para a Sky. E agradeço a todos por disponibilizarem o tempo, uma tarde toda do dia a dia de vocês, que é extremamente corrido, para se juntarem ao exercício hoje. Antes de mais nada, bom, a gente vai ter 3 apresentações, uma da Sky, uma da Ankita e uma da Marta Beleiro, da WRI Brasil. Uma pausa para um café, por volta das 3h30, e, na sequência, vamos dar início a uma atividade prática, que vai ser bem gostosa e bem diferente de fazer, bem lúdica, com algumas peças que vieram da NACTO diretamente, especialmente para essa oficina. E a gente espera encerrar o dia de hoje por volta das 5h30, 18 horas. Vamos ver como as coisas se desenrolam. Obrigada mais uma vez. Sky.
Boa tarde. That's sadly still about the extent of my Portuguese, so I am going to present to you in English, so hopefully you have headsets if you need them, and for those of you listening in English, I have a crazy accent from New Zealand, so it's a little bit different than English or American, but hopefully you can understand me.
Having some problems. Why? Desculpa. No.
So while Hannah's pulling up the presentation, who here is from CET? A good amount. Anyone from SP Obras? No? Maybe they're coming. Hi, how's it going in the back? Welcome, come on. Maybe sit on this side so you can see the screens down this way. We might block a little bit over that way. What about SP Urbanismo? Awesome. Great. So we've got a mix of people here today, and what we're going to talk about is how we shape our streets to make a safer and more sustainable city. And one of the key things we like to do is to bring people from all different aspects of different agencies within each city that we work in, because all of us play a very different role in how we shape, how we plan and design our streets, how we implement them, and how we maintain them for longer term accessibility. So it really is today to help to inform you guys about some of the resources that are out there, and to try and be helpful for you to identify what your specific role is on a daily basis, and so that you can see how you can make a change and you can be, we often say, like the street superheroes or the superstars of transforming our cities to make them more safe and sustainable. I'll ask, has anyone here seen the Global Street Design Guide? Okay, great. Well, you're in for a treat for lots of very visual presentations. We'll see if we can get a laptop going.
Yep. Peço desculpas, não me acontece isso com frequência. O computador resolveu fazer uma atualização. Tá voltando, mas enquanto isso, vamos passar.
Fala do guia em português.
Ah, tá. Então, tá tudo salvo aqui. Anyway, we're gonna have a backup here.
Acho que no vidro não vai funcionar o mouse, né?
Não. Oh my God. Para aqueles que não sabem, a gente vai lançar uma versão em português desse guia. Ela já está traduzida, está no forno. Está voltando meu computador aqui. Para lançar, e teve a revisão técnica, o apoio da São Paulo Urbanismo, que olhou com muito cuidado isso. Foi. Vamos deixar de backup, mas pode tirar seu computador. Obrigada. Yeah. It's configurating. It's going to be, it should work. Yeah.
Right.
I'm sorry.
No problem. So hello again. What I would like to spend the time here today is to talk about how we can see the potential in transforming our streets. Can you guys see okay here, or do you want to move over? You can see the screen? Okay, great. So for us, it's really exciting to think about how do we restore the role of the street as the lifeblood of our communities and as the platform for sustainable mobility options. Now, our streets, as many of you may know, make up our largest continuous network of public space. But in almost every corner of the world, we've been doing a pretty bad job at how we design those spaces. And so we know now we really need to make much better, much more efficient use of this valuable real estate, we often say. And of course, when we think about our streets, we know they're the platform for many activities, right? Who thinks about movement when we think about streets? It's probably the first thing we think about. But what we often forget is that our streets are also places that our children can play or learn to ride a bicycle. They're places that we can dine or celebrate festivals in our local communities. Moments to perform. For some people, they're places to make money. Others to spend it in the local shops and the local economy. Our streets are spaces where we can spend time with old friends and maybe meet new ones. In our busy, crazy, bustling cities, our streets can sometimes provide a moment of relief and a moment in nature, or a chance to relax and do some yoga. And essentially, our streets are the front doors to our businesses and our homes. Now, they are, of course, not only about a lot of different activities, but they serve many functions, right? They not only help us move about and access our city and our neighborhoods and our jobs and our schools, but how we design our streets impacts our environmental sustainability, right? The air quality, the biodiversity, how we manage our water systems. Our design decisions also impact the economic sustainability, right? How much time people spend in traffic, how much money we spend on physical infrastructure in our cities, and how our local businesses can deliver goods and make sure that they can function. And of course, every single time we step out on our streets, they impact our overall livability and quality of life, right? You think about it, you step out onto a busy street and you become stressed and angry and frustrated, and that can impact your entire day. Or we can create environments where our everyday lives are improved through design decisions around our streets. But the lens I want to focus on today is around public health and safety. And this is because 1.3 million people die every single year on our streets. 1.3 million people. That's one person every 30 seconds. So today alone, almost 3,000 people are going to be dead. Just today. That somebody's child or parent or friend or relative. Does anyone remember the Malaysian Airlines plane crash from 2014? Incredibly horrible, tragic, disastrous event. The road fatalities is like 12 of those planes going down every single day. Every day. And we in this room have a power to change that, because these deaths are completely preventable. And actually, we know what to do about it. We know for a starting fact that speed kills. So we know that we have to lower our speeds. Now, if we look at the relationship between the speed of a vehicle and its impact when it hits a pedestrian, and the risk of pedestrian death, so the chances that I'm going to survive that crash. If a car is moving at 30 kilometers an hour, I have a 10% chance of dying, but I have a 90% chance of surviving that crash. Now, if that vehicle is going 60 kilometers an hour, I now have only a 10% chance of surviving. 90% chance that I am dead when that vehicle hits me. So we know that our human body can only withstand a certain amount of force, right? We're not designed to withstand the impact of a vehicle. And while my nephews, I think, would love to walk around looking like this, we don't. We don't walk around with the protective armor like we have when we move in a vehicle. So we see the evidence showing us that for every 1 kilometer an hour that we're moving in a vehicle, our risk of fatality is up by almost 5%. So we have to ask ourselves in our daily jobs, when we get so much pressure politically to move more vehicles as fast as possible, how many minutes of travel time are you willing to trade for somebody's life? So luckily, we're seeing examples from all around the world where cities are actually lowering their speed limits through policies. Like in Paris, we see the 20 is plenty campaign. It's 20 miles per hour out of the UK. I have to put in my home country here in New Zealand, where a lot of the cities are taking their whole downtowns, making them 30 kilometers an hour. And I was just reading last night, actually, Brussels in Europe is also proposing the same thing, 30 kilometers an hour across the entire city, and then just having select streets that can go a little bit faster than that. And of course, through physical geometric design, which is what we're going to talk about a lot today. Now, the second main thing once we deal with speeding as a killing factor is that we have to prioritize sustainable mobility choices. And once again, this is very controversial, right? But we know this means that we must stop prioritizing and subsidizing individual modes of transportation, people driving in individual cars. And at the same time, we have to make sustainable transportation options more affordable and accessible and convenient for people to take, to make that choice. Now, here in São Paulo, almost 2/3 of your population are taking transit and walking, which means they're all pedestrians, right? And even people who are driving are pedestrians every day. Yet, we design the bulk of our streets for the minority of users. And we've seen again evidence. If we look at the traffic fatalities, sorry you guys, I'm not sure you'll be able to see that over there. We have here traffic fatality, there's plenty of seats here actually, if you want to come. And the daily vehicle miles traveled per person. There is an absolute correlation between the number of people on the road who are driving and the number of fatalities. These numbers are from the United States, but we see our least car-orientated states down here and the much higher car-orientated states further up. We see the same kind of benefits through cycle infrastructure. The more bike lanes we build, the more cyclists we get, maybe not surprising, but the great thing is we get a reduced risk for everybody. The streets are safer. These numbers are from the United States, but the same numbers coming out of Copenhagen. More kilometres cycled means a reduced risk and less people dying. Very simple examples like this one in New York, where here the bicycle lane was being used to protect the parked cars. Seems a little backwards when you think about it logically. So by simply moving the parking lane out and putting the bikes behind the parking lane, now the big tough metal boxes actually protect the very vulnerable cyclists, which makes a lot more sense. And so we see here drastic numbers of a reduction in injuries, reduction in crashes, speeding went down, and as a great side benefit, retail numbers went up. We see similar examples, our partners here from WRI, looking where we give dedicated spaces for BRT, this one in Mexico, our crash numbers go down. And none of this is maybe surprising because when we look at the efficiency of our streets, if you imagine 3 meters of space, right, it's an average travel lane width. We see that private motor vehicles, this is our least efficient way to move people. Buses mixed in with traffic, protected bikeways, transit lanes, sidewalks, and then we get our heavy rail, right? But if we're thinking about how we want to move people around, we have to look at the efficiency and how we make design decisions around distributing that space. Now, to move 50 people in these different modes, we see take up a different amount of space. So as we grow, and hopefully upwards and not necessarily outwards, do we want to be moving people like this? Or do we want to take a multimodal approach? The numbers pretty clearly show that if we take the same dimension of space and design it as a car-orientated space versus multimodal, we're losing out by being able to move 2.5 times as many people in that same space. Right? This is stuff you guys are deciding on a daily basis in your work. And we're seeing policies support these. Just 2 weeks ago in Paris, Mayor of Paris with C40 launched Green and Healthy Streets. Fossil fuel declaration, right? Cities are signing up to this. 12 mayors signed on there. We see out of London other efforts around a toxicity charge. When we're talking about sustainable transportation options, there's many different ways we can approach this. And even from a few years ago, cities like Chennai in India, where they announced that 60% of the budget of their construction is going to NMT, non-motorized transport, people walking or cycling. So that's great if we can get these policies sorted and we can drop our speed limits. But the other fundamental thing we have to do is design our streets to put people first. We've spent decades designing spaces like this in the middle of our cities that have forgotten that our cities are about people. We've forgotten to give space to our most vulnerable users in the roadbed. And we have created environments where people have to risk their lives on a daily basis to go to work or to go to school. And what devastates me is the terribly large collection of photographs I'm getting around the world of pictures like this specific one out of Bogota, where someone in a wheelchair is expected to battle off with a bus. Does that make sense to anybody in this room that we design our cities like that? When we're designing and implementing our streets, if we design them like this, we send a message to the driver, the person behind the wheel, to use this space like a racing track. Right? The street says to me as a driver, rev up your engines and go as fast as you can. That's our doing when we're designing our cities. We're also creating environments where we're asking our most vulnerable users to walk 6 times as far to cross the street. Imagine asking your grandfather or someone, a mother with children and carrying shopping, to do that rather than just walking from here to there. Again, very logical arguments. And even in New York, not that long ago, we've still got a long way to go, but a lot of our streets used to look like this. So we've been stuck in this time of a self-fulfilling prophecy, where we've been answering the wrong questions, right? It's not any of our fault. This is how society has asked us to design our cities. And so we've been faced with congestion, and we've been told that the answer is to build more roads and widen the roads and give more space to cars. But that doesn't work, and we know that now. It may work for a month or two, but then that space fills up with cars. Remember the efficiency diagram I showed you? Private cars were right at the top. So it's never going to solve the issue. And we're just going to go round and round and round, all the time making our cities more dangerous and less safe. There's a great quote by the urbanist Lewis Mumford, and he says, adding highway lanes to deal with traffic congestion is like loosening your belt to deal with obesity. It's not getting to the cause of the issue. And one of our great mayors that we're working with in Bogota, Peñalosa, has always quoted that an advanced city is not a place where the poor move about in cars and aspire to own a car, but an advanced city is where the rich use public transportation. So luckily, we've got examples from all around the world, whether it's Melbourne in Australia or Istanbul in Turkey. Examples out of Finland with giant wide sidewalks where entire families can walk next to each other. Great new examples coming out of Ljubljana with transit streets that take the cars out of the downtown altogether. Here in São Paulo, just down the road, where our intersections are being redesigned to rethink the hierarchy of users. And sometimes it's small things, like in Lima, a little parklet that takes one parking space and gives that back to people and communities. Or it's quick, fast strategies with not much more than paint and planters to rethink the geometry at an intersection. In Mexico City, we see great examples where swaths of asphalt have been given back to bring people together, to give somewhere to sit down for children to play. Another home country example in here, the shared streets in Auckland, where cars are invited to use the space very, very slowly, but the pedestrian is the queen or king of that space. And the cycle infrastructure from London to Lima. And another one of my favorites, because last year alone, in both Auckland in New Zealand and Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, they both installed their first protected cycle facility. So we can jump from corner to corner of the world, and it reminds us that we're all in this together. We're all trying to deal with these challenges and making moves to advance and make safe and sustainable streets at the same time. So we have to share our lessons and have conversations together. That actually, in Auckland last time I was home, they took an off-ramp of a highway and painted it hot pink and gave it to the cyclists to allow them to move through the city. And the edges of the river in France in the Seine reclaimed back for pedestrians. Now seeing children play and people sitting and dining. It's so inspiring to see these types of transformations. And we can sit there and say, whatever, this is another corner of the world, and we're São Paulo. That's not us. But Copenhagen, one of the poster children of sustainable streets in the world, was not Copenhagen that long ago, right? It used to look like this. Now, it looks like this. Or Amsterdam. Streets that look like this transform to more equitably serve more users. Where swaths of asphalt that divided communities now bring people together. And these transformations did not drop out of the sky magically one day. right? We'd all love that if that happened, but it didn't. What happened is people like you in different parts of the world made a conscious decision to prioritize and invest in multimodal transportation and safer streets. So it's your bold visions and your technical support, your everyday advocacy and local action that is going to get us there. And that's a lot of the background of the work that we're doing as part of the Bloomberg Initiative for Global Road Safety, funded, as Hannah mentioned, for 5 years working here in Sao Paulo. And for us, our leader, Jeanette Sadak Khan, who used to run the transportation agency under Mike Bloomberg in New York, launched our program as part of this 5-year initiative. And we're working in many different streams, as Hannah mentioned, most closely with Embark, World Resources Institute, and the World Bank's IRAP assessment. And together we make up what we call the Safe Street, Safe Mobility team, the people looking at the infrastructure, the physical stuff of our cities. For us, the group, we come from NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials. That's a very long title to translate, I'm sorry. We're based in North America, and I can give anyone more information later, but one of the key things that we do is produce design guidance. Right? We often say as engineers, well, we can't do that because the book doesn't allow us to. But it's not about having excuses. And so Jeanette realized very quickly that we had to go back and change the book. And that's what we were doing as part of the Global Street Design Guide that we launched last year. And there's 3 sections, and we're going to give you a bit of a taste of what's in that today. It's also for free download, so anyone can access it off the website. And what's very exciting is that along with the production of the book, we've developed an endorsement campaign, and we did this in the United States as well for this book here, right, where it was launched, and then we now have over 50 cities, 9 states, and the national government came back and said, all right, yes, we agree with the principles in here, but if we started off trying to change those national codes, it would have taken us decades. So that's the model behind the Global Street Design Guide, now building a global unified voice to support these principles. So we have over 35 cities and 20 organizations, and we're almost finished the Portuguese and Spanish translation. So next year, hopefully we can come and give you Portuguese versions of this document. But part of our goal, bless you, is to look at how do we achieve this global agenda through local action, and how do we create resources that can inspire our leaders, be technical enough to inform practitioners, but accessible and visual enough to also empower communities to know what to demand of that space. And the premise behind it is simple. We take the hierarchical pyramid that we have had for decades, where the car has been at the top, and we've almost forgotten about the people in our street designs, and we flip that on its head. So now our people, our most vulnerable users, our children, our elderly, and our people with disabilities are the top priority and the lens through which we must use for every street design. Then we prioritize sustainable transportation options, making sure we can deliver freight and provide city services, and where we have space, we give it to the private automobile. We did this with a network of experts from around 40 countries and 70 cities around the world to pull from best practices of projects that had been implemented. So it's a collective effort from around the world. And what we're doing is quite simple. It's just asking what is possible. So it's important that as new cities around the world are built and areas are developing, that we get brand new streets right. Absolutely. But the bulk of our cities are already built. So if we don't go back and ask what's possible of what we have, almost like putting on a pair of glasses, right, when we go out and say, what is possible in this space? How can I improve this? And this is just one example of how that could happen. But that's what we have to do in our daily work, in every street that we work on. And unlike traditional approaches of street design, where we get to pick between an arterial or a local or a connector street, the Global Street Design Guide takes a place and people approach to street design, and it demands more of that valuable real estate in terms of desired outcomes. We demand that our street designs mean improvements in health and safety, livability and quality of life, multimodal access, and economic and environmental sustainability. And when we think about designing for place, of course we've got the built environment, but it's our responsibility to look at the context of natural environment, the specificities of the social and cultural context that we're working in, and of course the economic context as well. Let's see if this, we may be stuck. It's not a bad place to be stuck on designing for place. It's a very important topic. But let's see if we can. When we're thinking about place, there's different scales, right? It's important that we think about the immediate context of our streets. This means we as engineers and designers often think in plan or in section in 2 dimensions, right? But if you think about how we experience streets, it's actually in 3 dimensions. And it's not at a static moment in time, it's moving through often. So we have to think not only about the ground plane beneath our feet, but about all the edges around what we call the street room. So as planners, we have to think about the transparency, the spacing of entrances, everything that's happening on the side. We have to think about where we plant the light poles or the street trees and what that impacts the canopy above our head, whether we get shade on a hot day like today outside or not. So in the immediate context, we want to look at the different activities that are happening in a specific place, right? A specific street corner or a specific corridor down the road on a main street. But we also have to think about the slightly larger scale, which means that the decisions we make around street design out here may impact our entire system of how we manage our water. In a day of climate change, huge disasters happening, more extreme weather events every single day around the world. Right, just the last few months, 5 hurricanes in North America, destroying environments. Our decisions around street design and whether a street design has masses of impervious surface, or whether we're able to collect and detain and clean the water systems, that's part of our responsibility, right? The plants that we choose to plant in the streets impact the biodiversity. How we distribute that space impacts the air quality that we have to breathe every single day. New Delhi, Ankita, my colleague, who you're going to hear from soon, is from New Delhi. They've just shut all the schools in New Delhi because of the air pollution. Children cannot go to school because of the amount of pollution in the air, a very large portion of which comes from transportation. United Airlines has just stopped flying airplanes into New Delhi because of the pollution and the smog. So we may play a tiny little role, but we play a fundamental role in these big picture regional decisions when we think about local context. The other part of thinking about context and place is we traditionally have a street design, right? And it's the same street the entire way. And what we forget to often do is to look at the context on either side of that corridor. And the reality is that one street design isn't necessarily going to serve the needs of the users along an entire corridor. So we have to identify how street sections can change along that corridor, right? So I might be on this part of the street, and I might be in a neighborhood main street, and I make design decisions to distribute that space in a certain way. But I might move 2 or 3 blocks or a kilometer down the road, and the demands on that space is now different. So maybe that needs to be designed as a downtown commercial area. And then I may go a few more blocks along that corridor. And now the demands on that space in high density areas mean that the most efficient use of that space is to give it all to transit and pedestrians. So as the context changes along a corridor, so must our design decisions around how we distribute that, on how we move people, how much place we give not only to movement, but for people to stay and spend time in local businesses, local shops, local cafes, as well as moving through. So remember to take off your blinkers when you're looking at a street design and look at what's happening around the context of it so that we can make appropriate design decisions.
Here, right?
Yeah, just so we can go to here.
Ela quer compartilhar tanto conhecimento com vocês que tem 250 slides da apresentação e o meu computador está sofrendo. Eu peço desculpa. Nunca tinha acontecido isso.
Sorry for that. I'm apologizing. It's my fault.
Not a problem.
It's not collaborating.
Third computer, third time maybe. Maybe I can start acting this out. I'm doing my best to act it as we go, right? Moving down the corridor, thinking about the edges, spaces of transparency.
Whereabouts?
Go up. We can stand there.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can pull up the... This is what I was meaning by context changing, right? That the same corridor has one design, another design a little bit further down, and in a dense urban environment, that street design changing. Now the other key part of this is around designing for people, right? All of us in the room. And in the global guide, what we look at is all the different needs, starting with pedestrians, the needs and scales for cyclists, for transit riders, for motorists, people delivering city services and freight, and of course, often forgotten, but people doing business. Now, when we start with designing for pedestrians, we're all pedestrians. So we are designing for us every single day. And what we know is that we cannot be made safe as a pedestrian if we have unsafe speeds or if we do not have the facilities for us to move about our city and neighbourhoods. So we have to think about the scale of each of us, right? And that changes for somebody who's in a wheelchair or as a young child. But the number that we want you guys to remember is 1.8 metres. Because that's the dimension that somebody in a wheelchair needs to move around, to turn around, or for two people in a wheelchair to pass each other comfortably in the street, or somebody with a stroller. And of course, as pedestrians, we all move at different speeds, right? Everywhere from 0.3 to 1.7 meters per second. If you're in New York, in Manhattan, where we work, you are walking fast, you know, and if you slow down, you get a lot of angry looks. But the reality is we can't all move that fast. So we have to consider people who are moving at slower speeds. I think we might be stuck again. Talk about slow speeds. Plenty of time to take a photo, right? Right, so what we've done is created like almost a toolbox in the global guide that we can use as a checklist to design not just the basic infrastructure, but a holistic approach to safe pedestrian infrastructure. And of course, that must start with sidewalks, right? And our sidewalks are our most fundamental network of infrastructure to move pedestrians, our most vulnerable users. And what's fundamental is that we think about that clear path of the sidewalk as a separate thing to the overall width, because we know that businesses spill out and doors need to open. We know that we need to put lighting poles and trees. So the clear path has to be a separate dimension. Has anyone walked down the sidewalk and it's like a beautiful sidewalk and somebody's come and put a light pole in the middle? Yeah? Happens so many times in every corner. It's crazy, and that's a big coordination issue between the different agencies. And it doesn't mean that there's one dimension for sidewalks. When we go back to thinking about context, in a quiet residential street, we don't need a 10-meter sidewalk. That would be crazy, right? But in a large commercial downtown area, we may need 8 to 10 meters for that sidewalk. Here, outside on Boa Vista, like these sidewalks are so narrow with obstacles for the amount of people using them, right? So we have to understand the demands of the users to make our decisions around dimensions. And another very frustrating thing we see in every corner of the world is that sometimes people build the most beautiful sidewalk and then they don't put in an accessibility ramp. So that means someone in a wheelchair, someone with a stroller, someone with a disability cannot use that piece of infrastructure. It's a tiny detail, but it matters down to the millimeter, those design decisions. And of course, we can have all the best crossings, the best sidewalks in the world, but if we don't have crossings to help us connect those, then we don't have a complete network. And in the global guide, we recommend every 80 to 100 meters that we have a pedestrian crossing on all legs of the intersection. And you have to think about it. How long would you wait or walk? Right? To get from here to that building away to cross the street? How far are you going to go out of your way before you decide to just make a risky decision? So in urban areas, we should not have crossings further than 200 meters apart. Because otherwise, if it takes somebody more than a few minutes, they're not going to do it. And then they're going to take risky behavior and cross the street. And that is not their fault. That is our fault. That is our responsibility as people who design the street network and sidewalk network